You know that feeling when you're in a room full of people laughing and you're laughing too, but inside you're just empty, like you're performing the echo of a feeling you can't actually access anymore. Meet Alex. From the outside, Alex has what the world calls a good life. A stable job in a grey office cubicle, a comfortable quiet apartment, a small circle of reliable friends. There is no drama, no chaos. Every decision is measured, every risk assessed and usually avoided. Alex's life is not built on passion. It is built on a single, unwavering principle: safety. This isn't caution, it's architecture. Every relationship, every commitment, every plan is evaluated through one filter. How likely is this to cause me pain? Joy is suspect, it's too volatile. Excitement is a warning sign, it leads to unpredictability. Alex has mastered the art of the neutral life, believing this is what maturity looks like. To feel nothing is better than to feel hurt. People call Alex reserved, thoughtful, maybe a little detached. They don't see the internal system at work. They don't see the constant quiet scanning, the emotional threat assessment running in the background of every interaction. Is this person getting too close? Is this opportunity too uncertain? The goal is not happiness. The goal is containment. Psychologically, this is what happens when the nervous system decides the world is not safe. It's not a choice, not really. It's an adaptation. When pain, especially the profound, unexpected kind, hits early and hard, the mind can learn a brutal but effective lesson. The only way to win is not to play. Connection becomes a vulnerability. Desire becomes a liability. So you build walls. Not the loud, angry kind, but the quiet, elegant ones. You become a curator of your own emptiness, mistaking the absence of pain for the presence of peace. You trade the dizzying heights of potential joy for the solid, flat ground of guaranteed survival. Alex's friends don't understand why he won't take the promotion, why he ends relationships before they get too serious, why he seems to retreat from his own life. They think it's indecision, a lack of ambition. They have it backwards. It's a highly efficient, deeply ingrained defense protocol. It's the emotional equivalent of living in a room with padded walls. Nothing can hurt you, but nothing can touch you either. The tragedy isn't the loneliness. It's the fact that Alex doesn't even register it as loneliness anymore. He just calls it being smart. And then the plot twist, the one his entire system was designed to prevent. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a grand, life-altering event. It was a diagnosis. A routine medical checkup, a series of tests, a doctor's office that felt too bright. The news was delivered in calm, clinical terms, but the meaning was seismic, a chronic, progressive condition, manageable but permanent. A new unwelcome tenant, moving into the one place Alex believed was under his total control, his own body. The irony was almost poetic. He had spent a lifetime fortifying his emotional world against every conceivable threat. He had avoided the chaos of love, the risks of ambition, the vulnerabilities of hope, and the threat was never out there. It was in here, in his cells, in his blood. The one attack he couldn't see coming, the one he was completely defenseless against, came from within. All his careful architecture, for nothing. The ground didn't just shift, it vanished. The meticulously constructed identity of the safe one, the careful one, the one in control, it shattered in that sterile room. The very core of his psychological strategy, predict and prevent, was revealed to be a beautiful, useless fiction. What do you do when the fortress you built turns out to have been made of glass, and the real danger was inside it the whole time? This is where the real story begins. You didn't grow up in a war zone. You grew up in a house that felt like one. For Alex, safety wasn't a given. It was a calculation. A volatile parent, a door slamming, a voice that could shift from warmth to ice in a single breath. Childhood wasn't about exploration, it was about reconnaissance. You learned to read a room before you entered it. You learned to forecast moods like weather. You became an expert in the subtle physics of tension, how to disperse it, how to deflect it, how to make yourself small enough to avoid its trajectory. This is how you build a survivor. Not through dramatic escapes, but through 1,000 tiny adjustments. The nervous system doesn't learn to fight, it learns to forecast. It becomes a brilliant paranoid meteorologist, constantly scanning the horizon for storms that live inside people. As an adult, this wiring doesn't switch off, it just gets a new job. The corporate ladder isn't a climb, it's a minefield. A promotion means visibility. Visibility means a bigger target. Better to stay in the mid-level shadows, where your output is valued, but your personhood is overlooked. Relationships aren't connections. They are complex systems with too many unpredictable variables. Letting someone in means giving them a map to your vulnerabilities. Better to end things at the 6-month mark Before the patterns solidify, before their habits become your triggers, his friends see a man who's afraid of success, afraid of love. They don't see the architecture. To Alex, this isn't fear, it's superior intelligence. It's the quiet pride of the uncaptured, the unharmed. He has built a life with impeccable shock absorption. No major losses, because he never made a major investment. The goal wasn't happiness, it was structural integrity. The diagnosis then wasn't just an illness. It was a violation of a fundamental law, a flaw in the core logic of his existence. He had spent a lifetime believing danger was external. A person who could leave, a boss who could fire you, a market that could crash. You could see those coming. You could plan. You could build walls. This was different. This was a quiet cellular mutiny. The enemy had bypassed every perimeter, every early warning system, and was now operating from headquarters. His own body, the one thing he had to carry with him everywhere, had become the source of the threat. The fortress was not just compromised, it was the weapon. The initial reaction wasn't grief. It was a profound systems-level confusion, followed by a cold, furious clarity. All those years of emotional austerity for what? The careful diet of feeling, the portion-controlled intimacy. The life lived in a defensive crouch. It hadn't protected him. It had just made him alone. He had traded the vivid, messy risk of living for a guarantee of safety that never existed in the first place. He wasn't a survivor. He was a custodian of an empty vault. This is the pivot. The moment the survival brain faced with an enemy it cannot outmaneuver must choose a new strategy. Fight or flight are useless against an internal condition. You cannot run from yourself. You cannot argue with your own bloodwork. There is only one direction left times through asterisk. The diagnosis forced a brutal, irreversible intimacy. He had to listen to his body now, not as a threat to be managed, but as a compromised partner in a shared fate. He had to learn its new language of symptoms and limits. He had to care for it not as a warden cares for a prisoner, but as one survivor tending to another. And in that forced partnership, a strange thing began to happen. The hypervigilance, that exhausting skill of reading danger in every detail, it began to change its object. He started noticing other things. The way sunlight moved across his apartment floor in the afternoon, the genuine, uncomplicated concern in a friend's eyes when he finally told them, the solid, unremarkable peace of a pain-free morning. He had spent a lifetime building buffers against pain. Now he was being forced by the very source of the pain to finally touch the world without them. The walls came down not because he was brave, but because they had become irrelevant. The attack was already inside. This is the final quiet twist. The thing meant to diminish him became the thing that forced him to expand. He didn't become reckless. He became time's present asterisk. He took the promotion not as a step toward a target, but as a challenge to engage with. He let the new relationship grow past its 6-month expiry, not because he was sure it was safe, but because he finally understood that nothing is. Safety was never the point. Aliveness was. The chronic condition became his most honest relationship. A permanent, non-negotiable reminder of his own fragility, and in accepting that the old, exhausting war to be invulnerable simply ended. The energy he used to spend on defense was freed up. For the first time, he could use it to live. You are not defined by what you survive. You are defined by what you choose to touch after you realize survival was never the goal. The goal was to feel the sun even knowing it sets, to hold a hand even knowing it will one day let go, to build a life, not a bunker. The ultimate act of defiance is not to outlast the threat, but to stop letting it design your world. If this quiet rebellion resonates with you, you're not alone. Share in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where your defense mechanisms failed, you only to find something real on the other side? If you want more of these psychological deep dives into the stories we live but rarely tell, subscribe. We go deeper right here. Here is part 3. He didn't conquer the pain. He stopped fighting it. And in that surrender, a strange thing happened. The pain lost its voice. It was still there, a constant low-grade hum in the background of his days. But it was no longer a narrator. It didn't get to define his mornings or veto his evenings. It was just data. A signal from a body that was, for all its flaws, still stubbornly here. He began to listen to it not as an alarm but as information. A dull ache meant he needed to move. A sharp twinge meant he needed to rest. It was no longer a tyrant. It was a blunt, inconvenient teacher. And once its commentary was muted, he could finally hear everything else. He noticed the way his best friend's laugh started in the stomach, a genuine, unpolished eruption that made everyone else join in. He noticed the weight of a coffee mug in his hands, the heat seeping into his palms. He noticed the specific shade of grey in the sky just before a rain, a colour he'd spent a lifetime calling simply cloudy. He had built his entire personality around being a vault sealed, secure, impenetrable. Every relationship, every ambition, every joy was filtered through a single question times. Will this hurt me times? His life was not a collection of experiences. It was a series of calculated risks, each one meticulously weighed against the potential for damage. Now, the very thing he'd spent a lifetime fortifying against was living inside the walls. The attack had already breached the perimeter. The defense was obsolete, so the walls didn't come down with a crash. They just dissolved. Like mist in a morning sun he'd finally stopped ignoring. He didn't become fearless. He became time's attentive asterisk. He asked the woman he was seeing to move in, not because he was certain it was forever, but because he was certain he wanted to see her face across the breakfast table tomorrow. He started writing the novel he'd outlined for a decade, not because he was sure it would be published, but because the sentences themselves felt alive in his hands. The condition was no longer his enemy. It was his most honest confidant. A permanent somatic whisper in his ear times. You are breakable. You are temporary. You are here. Asterisk. And in finally accepting that whisper, the exhausting decades-long project of building an unbreakable self just ceased. The energy had nowhere to go, but out into the world he'd been too busy analysing to actually touch. We are not sculpted by what happens to us. We are sculpted by what we allow ourselves to feel times after times it happens. The courage isn't in surviving the storm. It's in stepping out into the gentle, uncertain drizzle that follows and feeling the cool water on your skin without immediately searching for shelter. Your heart is not a fortress to be defended. It is a nerve ending. Its purpose is not to be safe, but to be times alive. Asterisk. To register the touch, the loss, the joy, the devastating, beautiful friction of being a soft thing in a hard world. The ultimate rebellion is to stop treating your own sensitivity as a flaw to be managed and to start recognizing it as the only thing that makes any of this matter. If this shift from fortress to feeling resonates with you, you're not alone. Share in the comments. Asterisk, asterisk. When did you realize you were building a bunker instead of a life? Asterisk, asterisk. If you want more of these quiet dissections of the inner worlds, we hide subscribe. We go deeper right here. So the armor didn't crack under a single heroic blow. It just lost its purpose. Like a bridge he'd spent a lifetime fortifying, only to realize the war had moved to a different country entirely. She didn't become invulnerable. She became time's porous asterisk. The promotion she'd spent 3 years strategically angling for was offered, and she heard herself say, I need to think about what that life would actually feel like. She called her father not to relitigate the past, but to ask about the scar on his thumb, a story she'd never had the patience to hear. The high-performance identity she'd curated, that sleek, efficient machine of ambition and control, began to feel like a rented suit. Impressive, but not hers. The anxiety was no longer a malfunction. It was her most reliable gauge. A constant internal barometer reading times. This path feels like a lie. This person feels like a transaction. This version of success requires a numbness you cannot afford. Asterisk. And in trusting that signal not as noise to be silenced, but as data to be considered, the exhausting lifelong campaign to outrun a sense of fraudulence simply lost its fuel. The effort redirected. Not upward toward some pinnacle of having it all, but inward toward the quiet question of what all was even for. We are not defined by the roles we master. We are defined by the authenticity we are willing to risk when the performance ends. The bravery isn't in climbing the ladder. It's in feeling the first terrifying sway of the rungs, looking at the solid-looking structure and whispering, this is just a ladder. It is not the sky. Your worth is not a stock to be traded. It is a pulse. Its purpose is not to accumulate proof, but to experience proof times of life, asterisk. To register the resonance, the dissonance, the relief, the terrifying, liberating truth of being a feeling thing in a world that prizes function. The real power move is to stop treating your own depth as a complication to be solved, and to start recognizing it as the only source of navigation you've ever truly had. If this shift from performance to presence lands for you, you're in the right room. Tell me below, asterisk, asterisk. When did you realize you were reading from a script instead of speaking from your spine? Asterisk, asterisk. If you want more of these quiet excavations of the selves we perform versus the souls we inhabit, hit subscribe. we go there together.